humbly beseech thee for the Parliament of Barbados, especially the Senate at this time assembled, that thou would be pleased to direct and prosper our councils to the advancement of thy glory, the good of thy church, and the safety, honor, and welfare of our people. All this we ask in the name of Jesus Christ, our most blessed Lord and Savior. Amen. Let us together say the prayer that our Lord himself would have taught us. Our Heavenly Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Now may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all, now and forevermore. Amen.
The Senate is now in session.
The Governor General, announcements by Your Honor the President.
I'm to advise that my deputy, Senator Greenwich, will not be able to join us today, nor will Senator Walcott, Senator Moore, or Senator Tate. Now the minutes of the meeting held on Wednesday, April the 1st, are not quite ready and have to be deferred.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers.
Mr. President, I'm commanded to lay the Barbados International Business Promotion Corporation Incorporated in West Barbados annual report for the financial years April 1, 2018 to March 31st, 2019.
Reports from select committees, questions to ministers, requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate moved by ministers.
Mr. President, I beg to move that that this Honorable House suspends Standing Order 45.22 for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that Standing Order 45.2 be suspended for the balance of today's sitting. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We take the ayes of it.
And Mr. President, I beg to move that Senator Rogers be appointed temporary chair of committee for today's sitting.
The question is that Senator Rogers be appointed temporary chair of committee for today's sitting. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
I think he is so appointed by acclaim.
Introduction of bills.
Mr. President, I beg to move the first reading of the Criminal Justice Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2020, the Control of Disposable Plastics Bill 2020, and the Income Tax Amendments Bill 2020.
The question is that the Criminal Justice Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2020 be read a first time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. Further question is that the Control of Disposable Plastics Bill 2020 be read a first time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. And the third question is that the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2020 be now read a first time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Public business. Order number 4, in the name of the Honorable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Control of Disposable Plastics Bill 2020.
Mr. President, I rise to introduce this Control of Disposable Plastics Bill, conscious that the conversation about plastics is rising. There is no doubt that plastics are doing damage to our environment around the world, land, sea, and air, and that the control of plastics, therefore, is not just a Barbados issue, it is a global issue. And as we learn, sir, as we learn better, we do better as a country. And learning better, Mr. President, is not just about us finding environmentally friendly alternatives to substitute for the use of plastics in our everyday life. Learning better, sir, also means finding the best ways for us to make the necessary changes in a manner that is suitable and works best for Barbados. We are not just citizens, but we, not just as citizens, Mr. President, but as legislators. What we have to do is be open-minded, not only to learning what to change, but also learning how best to change, given our unique circumstance as a country. And as Barbados learns how best to change, we will continue to evolve our behavior as individuals to protect our environment, our national policies, and our enabling legislation. The bill that is now before this honorable House would continue to evolve our legislation. It proposes to repeal the Control of Disposable Plastics Act 2019-11 and replace it with the Control of Disposable Plastics Act 2020. This bill, it introduces additional terms and definitions that help to clarify meaning as we relate to the rest of the bill. Some of the main features of this Control of Disposable Plastics 2020 bill, Mr. President, is the prohibition of single-use plastics. That is one of the main features, and I will go through a few of those features, not all of them, but the ones that I believe are most significant at this time for us to consider. You would see, Mr. President, that itemized in Schedule 1 in the first schedule to the bill are those prohibited single-use plastics. Among them are egg boxes, cups, drinking straws, forks, knives, spoons, stirrers. And when we say that these are prohibited single-use plastics, sir, it means in very basic terms that these are the plastic items clearly identified that are banned under this bill. Another significant feature, sir, is the fine for prohibited goods. If we take a look at clause 4, 5, there's a fine of $100,000 that can be imposed for those who intentionally flout the law and distribute, offer for sale, sell, or use these banned goods or prohibited goods. We have kept that fine, sir, at this level if some of us wish to cast our eyes back to the bill that is being repealed. And we are comfortable with this because it accords with the Customs Act, and we aspire to ensure that the kinds of fines and penalties that we impose are in fact coherent across our legislation. One-third area that is significant in this is fines for individuals who breach the law. If we cast an eye at clause 4.6 of the new bill, of the bill that is before us, you'll notice a difference. It imposes a $5,000 fine on any individual who uses prohibited plastic bags. Now, in the previous act, sir, the one being repealed, there was a $50,000 fine for individuals who were still using plastic bags. Now, after consulting and listening to the Barbadian people, we have reviewed that fine, and it is now reduced to a maximum of $5,000. You'll be pleased to hear, Mr. President, that since this government started to educate and sensitize Barbadians to the need for us to control plastics, there has been a very good response from Barbadians, including plastic bags. And I'm sure, sir, that if my colleagues, my fellow senators have gone around to the supermarkets over the last several weeks, you would see people who are walking with their own recyclable bags. That was not a thing we would see to that extent over the last several years. So it suggests that the change in behavior is beginning to stick in Barbados. While we are doing well, sir, we would recognize that since the crisis of COVID-19 has hit us, supply chains have been disrupted. And while this government had previously said people would not be allowed to have them unless they had some special exemption for that, we recognize that we have to pay attention and take into account the realities of the times. And with the disruption in supply chains, what we have done is said we will stick to the fact that there is a ban on the use of plastic bags. However, that those entities that would need during this time when the supply chain of the materials to make the biodegradable bags and the entry of the full biodegradable bags as well, when that supply chain has been disrupted, they may have the opportunity to apply for that exemption and get a license to bring in the plastic bags up for a period up to 3 months. This means, sir, that just temporarily there'll be an opportunity for us to continue to get access
to necessary bags at this time until such time as we are able to get that supply chain back working in a way that will put us back to our ambition. Another major feature of this bill, Mr. President, is exemptions. Now, all over the world, in countries where plastics are banned, they have allowed some reasonable exemptions. The reality is that in some cases, the plastics that we consider to be harmful, until we find a better substitute, they still provide the best protection for hygiene and health. And therefore, if we take a look at Schedule 3, the third schedule to this bill, we will see a list of exempted single-use plastic items. And while I will not go through the full list because it will take up more of the time of this honorable House than I think my colleagues would forgive me for, sir, I will mention a couple of them. For medical equipment and protective gear, plastic bags that are distributed by the airport authorities for health, safety, and security. There are some food storage, wrapping, and for frozen goods and packaging. And of course, as I mentioned, sir, there are many others. And if we take a look, as I said, to Schedule 3, we will be able to see that list. While there are many, it is not extensive, but I believe that as we look into the bill, we will see the reasons why those exemptions have been given, and quite frankly, they are not much different than exemptions that have been given in other countries who are indeed imposing this ban. The time will come, sir, when we will get better materials, but until then, we make the best of what we have at this time. You will notice, Mr. President, that in the list in Schedule 3, you will see exempted single-use plastic items. In that list, you will also see straws, plastic straws, sir. And these are plastic straws that in that schedule we say is specifically for persons with disabilities. Mr. President, the Honorable Kurt Humphrey, the minister responsible for marine and blue economy, along with his team, have met with the community of persons with disabilities. And they have made a very compelling case where many, particularly with certain types of disabilities, have said they have tried to use the currently available biodegradable and reusable straws, and they have simply not worked. We believe, Mr. President, that when we bring legislation, the legislation has to serve the interests of all. And therefore, for persons with disabilities only, the exemption to use the plastic straws have been given. Again, this is an opportunity for innovation, and we call on the innovators in Barbados to find a way for us to get rid of these straws by working with the community with disabilities to come up with an innovative solution that would work for them and would also work for the environment. Mr. President, I could go on, but I've been warned by my colleagues here in Senate, so I will not. But as I come to a close, I want to make sure that there's no confusion in the public mind with regards to this bill that is before us and to the Act for Returnable Containers that was passed earlier this year. The Act for Returnable Containers is about the PET bottles and the other bottles that you take in and you return for a refund. This is not this bill. This is about the environment and the control of single-use plastics. And so, sir, as I conclude, I want to say that having continued our conversations with the public and our partners, even after we would have passed the act that we are now bringing to the table, this bill that reflects public engagement at its highest and our ongoing effort to work with the public and our partners to continue to improve the legislation of this country. And it is with these few words, I beg that this bill be read a second time.
I recognize Senator Briggs.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also would not want to delay the chamber. I know many of us would rather be somewhere safer at this time, but there are a few things I just want to expand upon and speak briefly about this morning. I would like to thank the acting leader of government business for her introduction of the bill. It was thorough enough that I don't need to repeat anything that she said. I believe she highlighted all of the fundamental changes that currently exist in the bill. But so I want to have a broader conversation about why this bill is actually being introduced and how does that then spill over to what is happening right now in Barbados and going forward. Sir, the Control of Disposable Plastics Act is actually a part of a broader policy mandate that I believe the government has as it relates to building a blue economy in Barbados. And that is making sure that any activities that happen in the marine environment are not at the detriment of the ecological systems, or they are not at the detriment of those stakeholders who also rely on their livelihood of the marine environment. So the Plastic Act is the Disposable Plastics Act, Control of Disposable Plastic Act, is seeking to introduce legislation that moves Barbados in a direction where we have a more sustainable economy. In this manner, we're talking about the blue economy. But sir, what we have now going on is a health crisis. And that in itself is also going to present with us an economic crisis, as we all know. But I think it is an opportunity as well. As much as it is a dire situation, I think we have the opportunity to do something remarkable, to do something different. Sir, what COVID-19 has shown us is that we rested for too long with the notion that once a few persons in our society were profitable and there was this centralization of wealth and income, everyone else would kind of just fit into the mix and they would be okay. What some people call trickle-down economics. And what COVID-19 has shown us is that that is not the answer, and it has not been working for us. So there are too many persons in Barbados and globally who simply just work from paycheck to paycheck, and they cannot meet their basic needs. And some are reporting now that this pandemic will cause 500 million people globally to move downwards into poverty. I'm sure there are persons in Barbados that cannot afford to miss another paycheck. They're already having a difficult time making ends meet. And the question that we should be really asking ourselves at this time is, how do we redesign an economy that is more sustainable and that more persons can share in the economic pie? Sir, with tourism expected to lose approximately 80% of its revenues in the coming months, and we're also not sure how long that will continue. we have to find a way to make Barbados competitive in a post-COVID-19 world. And we're seeing very clearly that a lot of that economic activity will have to be digitally driven. Sir, and we have to ensure that the infrastructure is there, that when we do enter that world, we are ready and we are equipped. But sir, as I talk about sustainability and as I talk about the economy, there are some things that I sit and I reflect on now that we're having to deal with this health crisis. And one is looking at our local economy and seeing what is absolutely necessary. What is it that we have to absolutely get right going forward? And so when I ask that question, three key things come to mind on how do we build a sustainable economy, and what are some of the things that we need to get right and get right very quickly. So food production, water, fresh water supply to persons, and energy independence. So I believe that those will be the things that determine our survival in the future. So people cannot go without water, they cannot go without food, and any economic activity that we engage in will need an energy source. So how do we then try to shock and climate-proof these three areas of our society? When we look at food, sir, I know the government has rolled out a plan for increased production as it relates to fresh produce, but I also want us to remember that we have to climate-proof that increase in production going forward. And we also have to find ways of a centralized way of distributing that food. Sir, one of the things I also think we also need to think about is ownership. How much of our food production at the moment and the retail of that production is owned by Barbadians? Because if you don't own something, then it is very hard to control. And in a crisis, you find yourself at the mercy of others. Sir, as it relates to the fresh water supply, we are now faced with this pandemic where washing your hands is vitally important. It could be life or death, a situation of life or death. Sir, for far too long we have played and toyed around with getting consistent water supply to many of our rural communities. And what I also want to say in this moment is, with longer droughts projected and predicted by climate scientists, and short, intense rainfall events expected as well, we have to find ways to adapt to these new conditions. Sir, if we're not careful, the lack of water could also cripple this country. And that is a very stark reality that we are going to have to face. Because as outside gets drier, then there's a greater demand for water. If your aquifer levels are lower, there's a lot of salinity coming into the water, the freshwater supply, then that means there's more demand than you have supply for, and you will find yourself in a very serious situation. Sir, and I think that when we look at the provision of water, one of the things that we have to get right as well is trying to reduce the leakage rate. And I know this is something that we've always heard in the discussions around Barbados. But sir, I think what I have not heard is, why do we have these leaks? People complain about the leaks, then we go to fix them, but I have not heard why the leaks occur in the first place. Sir, there's not a lot of conversation about, for instance, the pressure that's in the water system, the pumping, the lack of equipment, the equipment failure, along with the age of the pipes. All of these things go into why leaks happen. Sir, and if we have a conversation about why are these leaks occurring, I believe we have about a 60% non-revenue water percentage, and that is just unsatisfactory in a country where we are water scarce. In addition to that, we also need, Mr. President, to look at desalination facilities. This is something I know the previous government had on the table, but that is not a proposal that I'm hearing from the government. But I think moving forward, if we are going to seriously look at the lack of water and becoming water secure, desalination facilities have to be part of a comprehensive plan going forward for water supply. And rainwater harvesting, this is something that I've spoken about previously, Mr. President. When I look around my community and my neighborhood, I can comfortably say less than 10% of houses have water storage tanks. That is completely unacceptable. If we are predicting longer droughts, more frequent occurrences of drought, we're going through a drought right now. We do not have the adequate levels of water in this country. How are we going to augment the groundwater supply going forward? And one of the things that we have to roll out very quickly is ensuring that people have the water tanks, the storage tanks, in order to augment the water that is coming from the distribution. Sir, and then I move on to energy. And this is, as I said, all in tying in with how do we build a sustainable economy. Sir, we have to increase our reliance on renewables. It is absolutely imperative. If we want to be, and this is something the government has touted, we want to be at least carbon neutral by 2030, then we have to be extremely ambitious as it relates to changes in the grid. Sir, in deciding the type of market that we want going forward. And sir, something that I've not heard mentioned publicly, but looking at our transportation system and networks. If we actually wanted to be carbon neutral by 2030, we would have actually had to stop or reduce the amount of new vehicles, new combustion engine vehicles coming into the country about 5 or 7 years ago. I have not heard any robust strategic plan on how we convert a lot of our transportation to electric vehicles going forward, as a third of our fossil fuel consumption comes from transportation. And I know that there have been pictures circulating regarding the Transport Board Authority and the EVs. However, Mr. President, that will simply not be enough to get us there. And I say that on a backdrop that we spend on average about $500 million every year in fossil fuel. So, sir, if a dollar saved is a dollar earned, anything that we can do to ensure that we save dollars, because what we are facing now is the economics of survival. We have to look at the areas that we can save monies where it is possible. The last thing I would want to mention, Mr. President, is, and I noted this earlier, is that we need to have in place, in a post-COVID-19 world, a larger entrepreneurial class in Barbados. It is quite clear that those persons who have income and asset and wealth in Barbados cannot carry the Barbadian economy. There needs to be more persons in Barbados connected to the global market to increase the pie. We cannot continue with the same people trying to earn profits from the same pie. Or we cannot have a situation where the same people are reaping benefits, however, they're not having a redistribution of wealth effect to larger amounts of persons in Barbados. And sir, on that backdrop, I just really want to say that this is the time now to make the ambitious changes. They say you don't let a good crisis go to waste. Sir, in this crisis, I think the government can be bold. I think they can be ambitious enough to make fundamental changes in our society so that we survive after this crisis. And when I say that, I'm talking about things like obsolete public sector systems, things that no longer serve us, Mr. President, that we continue to make excuses for, and they help us to remain stuck. If this crisis has shown us anything, it's that no one will come to save us, and we have to be equipped enough to fight on our own. Sir, I think one of the things, too, that we have not spoken about in this country, and then this is in relation to building not just a sustainable economy, but a just society, is a national conversation about race and class, and how we treat those in the lower echelons in our society. In this crisis, we've seen an outpouring of kind gestures, and we have seen persons who do have help those who do not have. But what I'm also asking for is that as we move forward, the economic discrimination that we have that is related to race and class also be addressed. Because if we're talking about moving forward in a mature way, we have to heal a lot of wounds that we simply do not address in this country. And I see a lot of faces looking at me very strange this morning. But as I said, Mr. President, I had a lot of time to reflect. Sir, the last thing I would want to talk about is ensuring that anything that we do know is done in a sustainable manner. And I commend the government for putting together an economic council that will attempt to steer us out of these uncertain times. But one of the things that I'd ask for is that we go a step further. Sir, if we are putting together an economic team, we should also put together a sustainability team. As I said, the world that will present us post-COVID-19 will have some characteristics of the world we knew before, but it will be very different. And what I'm asking for is that we tie any economic activity to the social and environmental goals that we have moving forward. For example, if the government wants to embark on an economic policy where you are trying to create jobs in a particular sector, in a particular area, you have your environmental specialists to tell you this is the amount of energy you will be using, or this is the amount of waste that you will be generating, and these are how you deal with these issues. You also have your social experts on board where they also tell you the amount of persons who are unemployed in a particular demographic, for instance, your younger persons or your females, your young females, and you make sure that, let's say, for instance, the industry meets a criteria. They hire at least a third of those vulnerable groups in that sector to ensure that it is a more inclusive sector, Mr. President. So, sir, I'd wrap up by saying there are many things that we have to address, and I do not think it is beyond us to tackle them, but we have to tackle them in a way that is multifaceted, and as rightly said by the government, it has to be all hands on deck. But sir, I really, really would like for us as a country to, one, address the problems that we do have, and then work together. Because I was in a meeting recently, and this is why I am speaking so broadly now. I was in a meeting recently, and a professor of climate science said, COVID-19 is just a brief snapshot that humanity is seeing as it relates to the climate crisis. It is climate change and how it disrupts life in a very short, condensed period of time. And Barbados being extremely vulnerable to what is to come in the future. That is why I stand here and ask that we make sure that anything that we do going forward is more sustainable. Sir, and with those few words, I'm obliged to you.
May I inquire whether there are any other honorable senators who may wish to speak? Senator McConnell?
Well, Mr. President, there is nothing further to say. I believe that Senator Drake spoke far and wide, and she truly made the point that it's not just about looking at our marine environment, but it's looking at our economic environment and our social environment and all that contributes to the environment we will live in going forward. And so with there being nothing further to say, sir, I beg to move that this bill now be read again a second time.
The question is that the bill under consideration be now read a second time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that your honor do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself in committee for the further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate for the further consideration of the bill under consideration in detail. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it, and we are now in committee.
The Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 1 stand part.
The question is that Clause 1 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
I beg to move that Clause 2 stand part.
The question is that Clause 2 stand part. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
I beg to move that Clause 3 stand part.
The question is that Clause 3 stand part. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Beg to move that Clause 4 stand part.
The question is that Clause 4 stand part. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Clause 5.
Beg to move that Clause 5 stand part.
The question is that Clause 5 stand part. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Clause 6.
I beg to move that Clause 6 stand part.
The question is that Clause 6 stand part. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Clause 7.
I beg to move that Clause 7 stand part.
The question is that Clause 7 stand part. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Clause 8.
Beg to move that Clause 8 stand part.
The question is that Clause 8 stand part. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Clause 9.
Beg to move that Clause 9 stand part.
The question is that Clause 9 stand part. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Clause 10.
Beg to move that Clause 10 stand part.
The question is that Clause 10 stand part. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Clause 11.
I beg to move that Clause 11 stand part.
The question is that Clause 11 stand part. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Clause 12.
Beg to move that Clause 12 stand part.
The question is that Clause 12 stand part. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Clause 13.
I beg to move that Clause 13 stand part.
The question is that Clause 13 stand part. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
First schedule.
Beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
The question is that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Second schedule.
I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
The question is that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Third schedule.
Beg to move that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill.
The question is that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Fourth schedule.
Beg to move that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Fifth schedule.
Beg to move that the fifth schedule be the fifth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the fifth schedule be the fifth schedule to the bill. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. Temporary Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
The chairman of committee for today's sitting, Senator Reverend John Rogers, has reported to me the passage of the bill under consideration in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
The question is that the bill under consideration be now read a third time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Control of Disposable Plastics Act 2020.
The question is that the bill under consideration do now pass and be so cited. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. The bill under consideration is now being passed and has become the act. Control of Disposable Plastics Act 2020.
Order number 5, sir. In the name of the Honorable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2020.
Mr. President, I rise to introduce the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2020, which was prepared to give effect to the proposals as announced by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment, the Honorable Mayor Moore Motley, in the 2019 financial statement and budgetary proposals. At the time, Barbados was moving away, sir, from tax allowances, and we were moving in the direction of a system of tax credits. We believe, as we still do now, that the combination of lowering tax rates, a universal allowance, and targeted credits would help Barbados to better manage the country's finances while at the same time balancing social justice and fairness for those most vulnerable. This bill seeks to amend the Principal Act, sir, to do a few things. One, to expand the eligibility for the reverse tax credit of $1,300, whereby, sir, from income year 2018, employed persons who earn less than $25,000 per year would benefit from the reverse tax credit grant of $1,300. And before, you would recall, Mr. President, that reverse tax credit would have been applied to persons who earned less than $18,000 per year. And so by broadening the net from applicable only to those earning $18,000, we moved it up to those who are earning less than $25,000. And what that did, Mr. President, was to bring approximately 7,000 more employed persons into the benefit of the reverse tax credit. This bill also seeks to amend the Principal Act, sir, by introducing a compensatory income credit. The way this would work, sir, it is whereby employed persons who earn more than 25, so it starts where the reverse tax credit ends. Those who are earning between more than 25,000 but less than 35,000 annually, that they will be entitled to a credit of up to $1,250 for the income year 2019. So basically, for any taxes that persons in that 25,000 to 35,000 income band, for any taxes they would have paid during the year of 2019, when they file their tax returns, certainly within 2 years, they would be getting a refund. They would be getting that money back, the money in taxes they would have paid during the year 2019. It almost works, sir, like a meeting term, where you put in money, and then at the end, when your time is up, the money comes right back to you. And so that is the way that the compensatory income credit for those above 25,000 and below 35,000 would work. And Mr. President, you see that when we put them together, put those two measures together, that effectively people in Barbados who earn 35,000 or less, or you can say up to 35,000, however you prefer, they get relief from paying income tax once they file their returns. And so, Mr. President, this continues to be part of the approach that this government takes to providing benefit to those who are considered most vulnerable. In addition, sir, this proposed amendment would abolish tax rates of 16%, 33.5%, and 40% that previously applied to certain tax bands, taxable income bands, and to replace these three with new tax rates, so that from July 1st, 2019, there would be a reduction in income tax to 12.5% on taxable income in the 50,000, up to 50,000. And that a 33.5% rate would be applied to taxable income above 50,000. And that was from July 1st, 2019, sir. But for that latter band, which is the applicability of the rate of 33.5% on taxable income above 50%, starting January 1st of 2020, that 33.5% would be further reduced to 28.5% for taxable income over 50,000. Sir, those are a lot of numbers for people to digest. But the basic bottom line story is that these measures were designed to put more money in people's hands. This amendment, Mr. President, also would remove the child allowance of $1,000 starting January 1, 2019, adjust the rate of tax on interest and dividends for local sources to residents from 12.5% to 15%, to remove the withholding tax on interest, management fees, and royalties to non-residents with effect from April 1, 2019, and to exempt from income tax and corporation tax profits of branches paid from income earned outside of Barbados. So the intention is not only to put more money in ordinary people's hands, but also to make Barbados a little bit more attractive to those who would wish to invest their monies here. Mr. President, this is fairly straightforward. And I think that the amendments in this bill were proposed at a time when people in this country were owed more than $108 million for tax refunds due from the previous government between 2011 and 2016. This government has sought to use fiscal policy, which is government revenue, collection, and expenditure, to influence our country's economy. Now we have to recalibrate in the face of all that is happening now. But we do so with the confidence that having done well before, and we were on a very good trajectory before COVID-19 hit, having done it before, we have the confidence that the people of this country and this government can do it again. And it is with these few words that I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
I recognize Senator Caldwell Franklin.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I too do not want to be long-lived and wish that the two items would have been done as a cognate debate and saved me from getting it twice. But that is not what we're doing today. I'm talking about the item that should come next. Sir, my usual refrain, I will say this every time this happens. This is a budgetary measure from 2019. The law allows government. The Provisional Collection of Taxes Act allows government to raise taxes, either by introducing a new tax or increasing the rate of an existing tax in their budget. But then government has to come before Parliament within a 4-month period to put the legislation in place to effect that. The taxes could be levied from the next day, but the government has only 4 months to bring legislation. 4 months have passed since this legislation was passed. It also speaks to other pieces of legislation I've talked about. I don't want to raise again on the other one, so if you would permit me, to say that government has done it so often, and they come with a lot of acts that validate, but you cannot validate taking away people's constitutional rights. A person has their right to property. The courts have decided that money is property. And if government wants to take away a person's property, it has to compensate them by giving them money for that property, for the property that government takes up. And this is where we will have a problem, because if government takes away your money without the relevant law, they have to compensate you with money, because that's the only compensation that we know. So it is going to be impossible legally to validate these acts after. But the legislation requires that if government does not bring the legislation within 4 months, the tax cease to be payable. So people should stop paying the tax. It is not, you're not breaching any law, you're not being anarchist or anything like that. This is what the law allows. The law says that you should stop paying the tax. And further, the tax that you paid should be refunded to you. Government comes and they bring these unconstitutional validation bills all the time and get away with it. It is wrong. You can't tell me that you can get in here and bring legislation like the last one we had twice in less than a year, or 3 times in less than a year, but you can't get a simple amendment to the Income Tax Act and to the other pieces of legislation that the budget influences. I'll give you an example. Bus fares were raised in the last budget from $2 to $3.50. That, sir, is not a budgetary measure, because the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act says that a tax must be paid into the consolidated fund. So there is no consolidated fund in the owners of minibuses or the transport board. So you cannot raise bus fares in the budget, but we did. But worse yet, even if you could, 4 months have passed. There's simply no law in place right now in Barbados for people to pay $3.50 for bus fare, and they have been doing it for a while now. There is no law in place. Government has to stop being so sloppy. You have too many people available to you that you have to rush things like this to Parliament after the fact. It has to stop. This government by trial and error is not becoming, and it is not something that the Barbados Labour Party has been used to. At least the Barbados Labour Party that I'm familiar with. You've been too sloppy. Once people in Barbados look forward to order and good governance from the Barbados Labour Party, it is not happening. You have become like the rest, breaking every rule, doing what you like. It has to stop. I have no difficulty with lowering taxes for people. I ain't got a problem with that. None whatsoever. What I had problems with is writing off taxes for people, I'm talking about the VAT in particular, for people who stole it. And let me tell you something. It is a criminal offense to receive VAT and not pay it in. And this Parliament shamefully allowed those people who stole government money in excess of $1 billion to keep it. And then they say, well, could they let me get the poor people? So I'm thinking about the most vulnerable. The most vulnerable, the rich people that carry money, as far as you're concerned. Because those are the people who benefited most from your legislation so far. And the thing is, it is a criminal offense, and I will repeat it again and again and again till somebody listens. It is a criminal offense to receive VAT and don't pay in. So if it is a criminal offense, our Constitution requires the Director of Public Prosecutions to prosecute those people, and the only body who could give them a break from the Constitution, from prosecution under that Constitution of ours, is the Director of Public Prosecutions. But Parliament went and assumed the role of DPP and forgive people who stole the money. So we have to stop this nonsense, and we have to stop. I keep saying we, I mean Parliament, but I'm going to say this barbarous Labour Party administration has to get its act together. I'm sorry that I have to rise so often on the same issue. But somebody has to listen, somebody has to get it right. You cannot continue to do what you like and behave as you like because you have the numbers. Because one day coming soon, you will not have those numbers because you abused them. You were given a solemn responsibility to govern this country. You were given all 30 seats. And with that, you should be mindful of that responsibility and not be abusing it every opportunity you get. Now, sir, on a more personal note, and I wanted to say this on the adjournment, but I won't leave, so I can say it now. This government seems not to realize or seem not to understand that we are in a crisis, a pandemic of epic proportions never seen before on the face of the earth, as far as I'm aware. A pandemic that is so devastating. And you bring us here at the risk of my life to debate something that was on the that was pending since something last year, and the next one that we're going to do was a bill that the last administration should have dealt with. This is three years ago. So why are you asking me to come here, trying to make my wife a widow, to come and to tidy up something that you could have tidied up years ago, or after this crisis is over? It's plainly fool. Why are we here? It is not necessary. We are not. Look, this is. I do not know what to call it. Yes, thank you. It's reckless. You have no regard. You tell people to social distance and do all these kind of things. And government is don't assemble in crowds. This is a crowd. I stay home when the day comes. Me and my wife and Snow the dog. And I don't go anywhere. I saw the lady in the supermarket, turn back, because I don't want to mix up with people. I don't want to live for 100, but I don't want dead just yet. And you are being reckless with my life and the life of each one of us in here. I do not like it at all, sir. And to tell you the truth, I said I was going to speak on the German, but I'm not staying here this long. I'm gone. Thank you very much, sir.
Go safely, sir. I next recognize Senator Adam.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to change my introduction slightly given Senator Franklin's intervention there. You know, I wonder if we were facing what we're facing today with a GDP ratio of 177%, if anybody, let me rephrase that, if it was 177% to GDP, then I think one could say we've been reckless and we hadn't got our act together. Here we are. If we had not done what we did in the first year of the administration, we would not be in a position today where the debt to GDP ratio has been cut to the extent that we have the margin to deal with this pandemic. And we're being accused of not getting our act together. It's remarkable. I'll come on, although Senator Franklin has absented himself now, to why we're gathered here, why it's necessary. I don't think anybody particularly wants to be in a crowd, but it's an evolving situation. And we should all recognize that not only are we trying to work out how it is best to carry out essential functions, including passing legislation and keeping the administration of the country running, we're also trying to work out how we can evolve in a changing time to do that in a more and more safe way. And at the moment, I'm not going to play the epidemiologist, but everybody in here has on a mask. Some of them are beyond the norms recommended by the medical authorities. Some of them are below. We all do what we can. And we're all respecting social distancing methods. So it's tiresome to hear these kind of criticisms that we're reckless, we don't have our act together, and all the rest of it. Today we have getting on for $2 billion in foreign exchange reserves. We have financial resilience to deal with this project. People who work very hard, not just frontline workers, but even the general population who have to stay at home and so on and so forth. So to sit here and listen to those accusations is, for me personally, is beyond the pale. But I get into the main things I wanted to say in relation to this bill. We sit here and we're attempting to pass legislation of all sorts. This one is dealing with income tax. It is true it's measures that were implemented in 2019. But one thing struck me is that the government came to power on a manifesto that was coherent, that sought to change certain structures and pillars in our economy, and it's still pursuing that. But here's the thing. We may not realize it at the time, but our greatest prosperity is generated in times of crisis, and that's simply because we have to undertake changes that are sometimes forced upon us, but we end up acting more swiftly than we otherwise would. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. And this, I would say, this crisis is a catalyst for us that will allow us to focus both on the health emergency that's before us, but also on economic prosperity. You can't have the latter without the former. But some of the policies that the government has chased and is continuing to chase, things like digitization, the promotion of competition in financial services. Well, we've seen that pre-COVID-19, there was no great pressure, for example, to have a thriving e-commerce economy, or indeed no great pressure to have a system of payments based on digital payments that my honorable colleague Kay McCarney is really in charge of promoting and is doing a fantastic job on. It was just something that was happening. We're trying to push it through. And now, more and more people are realizing, thanks to COVID-19, thanks to supply chains that are under threat, thanks to the fact that everybody has to eat, that these are not just nice to haves. These are things that are transformational and that we have to pursue. Similarly, and of course, come from a family of lawyers, but I'm not a lawyer, some of the judicial process improvements and changes, and I listened to the Attorney General speak on Friday to his bill. These are things that we know we have to do. We know we have to have a country that is able to administer justice swiftly, carry out general administrative functions more swiftly than it has in the past, particularly for business. CAIPO is an example where we know we have to do a little bit better. And the focus we have out of this crisis, and that focus is how do we recover. This is bringing these questions more and more to the forefront. We can't be as leisurely, perhaps, as some people accuse us of being as we were. We have to get these things done quickly, and people are focused on them, including this administration. Again, it's tiresome to hear that we are not doing everything we can. Similarly, we've been held up on physical infrastructure projects, but those are the very projects that we not only need, but are the ones that are going to generate immediate employment as soon as we work out what is the safest way to bring people back to work, actually start building things, be it hotels, be it, there's a very interesting development that's being mooted around this Worthing Corporate Center, what have you. But these are now things that in order for us to get out of to enjoy a V-shaped recovery, or more likely a U-shaped recovery, we have to focus minds on. So the pandemic, yes, it's a disaster globally, but it is a catalyst for bringing to the forefront all the things the government has already stated it needs to do. And it's validation, in fact, in many regards for that. Senator Drake's mentioned the Jobs and Investment Advisory Council earlier. Well, that met for the first time. One of the relief and investment aspects of that, in human capital in particular, is a committee, a subcommittee of that advisory council being led by the principal of the University of West Indies, Udine Barito. They're going to meet this week to work out just what are the training opportunities that can be put in place for all these people who've been laid off. It's going to be very hard in the absence of a tourism bounce back for everybody to have their incomes restored simply through construction or other mitigating sectors. So a lot is being done, and a lot is being done quickly, and it's being done in a very dynamic environment. Now, the other thing outside of this pandemic acting as a catalyst, and again, I'm going to refer to Senator Drake, but perhaps not exactly in the way she anticipates, things like sustainable economy. Of course, those are very, very important. One of the aspects, I think, touching on that has changed as out of this pandemic is a growing realization that this debate between what is efficient and what is effective has really come to the forefront. So typically on a supply chain, many of which have been disturbed, firms previously focused on efficiency, just-in-time technology, just-in-time delivery, and so on. What can be delivered at minimum cost as fast as possible? Well, those really focused on processes that were very spare and lean, without any great resilience to them. And that's the word, resilience. We look at some of these supply chains now, and we do wish that maybe they weren't so efficient, because that efficiency did make them vulnerable to a shock, and a shock like this one. And so now we are looking at processes that have resilience built into them. That's a word we typically associate with natural disasters and rebuilding and so on and so forth. But in this case, it really validates what the government has been pursuing in terms of things like food security. You know, we want to bring more food into production, and it's not just a question of you want to have agriculture as an efficient industry. It has to be an effective one that can cope with shocks that directly threaten food security and the ability of people not to go hungry. Now, that might seem an extreme way of putting it, and I'll speak to that in just one moment, but it's very, very pertinent. I'll digress slightly to the water that Senator Drake's raised. I would say I've heard one opinion on our water crisis that says, yes, this is a water-scarce country. Another that says if we were doing everything right, if we had the money to repair all the infrastructure, this wouldn't be a water-scarce country. It would be one that's using its water well enough. The fact that we are coping, albeit not ideally, with the losses that are estimated between 40 and 60% of the water that's emitted and doesn't arrive at its destination tells me that if that weren't the case, we probably wouldn't be considered a water-scarce country. Now, on that front, water infrastructure is not just about the repairing of the pipes. It's also about understanding where the water is. And although that's a science, there's a certain amount of art to it also. And I can tell the Senate that recently on Wakefield Plantation, a test well was sunk there, and it found water. This is in the syncline between Claybury and Wakefield Plantations. And another one is going to be sunk, and they think also that's going to find water. That would be on Lebanon Arbor Plantation. Now, why is that significant? Significant because previously Wakefield didn't have access to water. The Ministry of Agriculture has moved on to that plantation to boost food production. The water supply was a potential issue. You may have heard of the Vineyard to Bowmanston pipeline, which was going to move water from St. Philip all the way up to St. John to furnish those plantations. Well, this potentially offsets the need for that. And again, this is about resilience. And these are things that are being pushed very, very hard because of the pandemic. We're laying the seeds for prosperity that we don't yet realize out of this crisis. I think there's a lot that could be said, and I think the speaker next after me might touch on this, on resilience in the health sector. It was noticeable to me that when this crisis first hit, I saw a comparison between how the Germans reacted to it and how the French reacted to it. The German response was much more effective because they had 25,000 intensive care beds, whereas the French only had 5,000, I think is the case. The Germans were actually taking French patients and Italian patients because they had this built-in resilience. Well, it is very satisfying to see for an administration that's being accused of not having its act together, that we have built in that resilience into our own health response. And I think, as I say, the next speaker may have more to say on that. I don't want to tell her what to say. But these are things that have meant that our own response, even with the scare last week that we had to quarantine 200 and 225 people, that we have the capacity to deal with that. Even if it emerges that through a lack of testing kits for the reasons that many people know here, we haven't always been able to track down everything. We have the infrastructure and the resilience in place through thoughtful and clever planning to deal with this. Now, the final part, I think, of my contribution really is an extension of that, and I just want to talk a little bit about what happens next. This is really, how are we going to evolve and adapt to change? We have to be dynamic. We cannot be static. Many people in here and outside have said things will change when this is done. We will see, because habits are quite difficult to change. But some things are clear. I started off by saying we have 1.7 billion in foreign exchange reserves. We probably end up spending about 40% of that just dealing with this crisis. But the money is there because we built in the resilience for it. What it also means is that many other countries with larger economies than us that do not have a welfare system, a social safety net that we do, they do not enjoy the luxury that we do of being able to choose their tactics for reopening the economy. That said, we don't have a bottomless pit of money, and it is important, even as we sit here saying, in some ways making a false distinction between health and economics. It is important to realize that at some point, even if we don't have ideal circumstances, we have to get economic activity up and running again. I'll go back to the food security. Sometimes this is just as simple as making sure people can put food on their tables and they're not relying on a social welfare net that is exhaustible. That is a fact. It is exhaustible. We are trying to replenish, and we will replenish, but that you can't go to that well indefinitely. So some decisions will have to be made, probably in May, as to how do we start this activity again? How do we allow people to work? How do we get households, perhaps with no breadwinners at the moment, with money in their pocket? And at the same time, how do we get back on track in our own economy? I would say that we're going to be able to do that from a position of strength. I saw several reports, one on Reuters and a couple on Al Jazeera, talking about how some countries, even a country as large as India, in some rural areas, they have to break their lockdown in order to collect the harvest. Not simply because the food will spoil, but because people will not be able to eat. That is the similar case in Colombia. Even in France, where it's not so much a question of being able to eat, but of watching your entire livelihood. This was an example of a strawberry farmer, just go down the tubes. Those are the kind of actions, if we do nothing, that you start to do damage to an economy that's very hard to repair, and it will be impossible to have any kind of swift or relatively swift recovery, V-shaped or U-shaped. And when we come to those decisions, it's really going to be a balance of growth versus jobs, but jobs have to be prioritized. I say all of this, Mr. President, really to reinforce something I think has been missing a little bit from the debate, is that health and economy are siblings. They have to get on, and they're almost inextricably linked. And how we reopen has to be done carefully, thoughtfully, but it has to be done. And with those few words, I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rawdon Adams. I now recognize Senator Dr. Crystal Haynes.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise this afternoon to make a brief submission on the income tax amendment bill. I am privileged to be in the chamber this afternoon to conduct the people's business. That's why we're here. We're not here for sport or because we want to be here necessarily just to get together. We have a purpose as parliamentarians, and when and if the time comes that we can do it in another form, we will gather in that form. I was a little disappointed listening to the submission from the leader of opposition business, because it almost feels like, you grow up in Barbados hearing somebody has a plaster for every sore. In his case, it almost feels like somebody has a sore for every plaster, because the tone that he took today was very reminiscent of what I heard when this Parliament met, probably within our first 2 months of coming together, where we sought to give public servants a 5% wage increase. And I remember him very, very vigorously throwing cold water on our attempts, even though we came to office at a time when we had seen 24 downgrades, a debt crisis, and no foreign reserves left in the bank. We sought at that time to increase public servants' wages to the tune of something like $60 million a year, but he threw cold water on that, which is a bit surprising as someone who represents workers. Once again, here we are making an effort to literally put more money in the hands of Barbadian workers, and somehow the conversation meandered from bus fares to property acquisitions. I wasn't really sure how to follow the discussion, but I really, really dread to think of a parallel universe where the leader of opposition business would be responsible for making the decisions that this government has had to make, particularly at a time like this, because it was, as he called it, the Ernie and Bert program that led to a lot of the economic stability that we are now seeing. And up to last Friday, you would recall that Standard & Poor's actually reaffirmed Barbados's credit rating at a time when countries across the board are actually seeing their credit ratings downgraded. And that's because in less than 2 years, what the government has able to accomplish in terms of bringing stability to our economic situation and also to restoring confidence in the Barbadian economy and in our ability to meet our obligations is something that I am sure would blow the minds of most people considering where we came from. I want to say that it is that stability that has given us the opportunity to invest in health systems. So you may notice that the Harrison's Point facility went from being a shell, a mere shell with trees growing up in it and vines all over the place, to a fully operational hospital with 220 beds, including ICU beds, in 5 weeks. 5 weeks to build a hospital with ICU capacity. That is a tremendous feat. And it's something that we would not have happened if we were still in the situation that we were in May last year. We saw the House of Assembly come to do supplementaries, not only for Harrison's Point, but to bring in other medical equipment, ventilators, to more recently order more tests so that we can identify this invisible enemy and so be able to properly treat and contain people who could potentially have the virus. I really don't want to imagine what Barbados would look like if we had not made the tough calls that needs to be made. But what we are doing today, I know that we, as a people generally, it's easy to, the things that tend to be topical are usually negative. So let's say the VAT on online transactions. We saw lots of furor around that. But here we are, actively seeking to put money in the hands of every working Barbadian. So in increasing the number of people that can access the reverse tax credit, we've actually added 72,000 workers, and those are gas station attendants, cooks, security guards, who will literally be receiving a check at the end of every financial year for $1,300. And that $1,300 was not $1,300 2 years ago. It was $650. We actually doubled that too. On top of that, having the cushion that we have has allowed us to increase the welfare budget by 40%. So to say that we are only looking after the wealthiest, it is a lie, to be honest. Because the evidence that sits really and truly when you examine the documents of the House, the evidence is clear that the policy decisions that are being made are ensuring that all classes of Barbadians, and particularly the most vulnerable, are being looked after in a way. I saw the Government Information Service very recently share a video where Minister Ford, the Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, she and her team were literally packing boxes, and as I understand, they distributed over 3,000 hampers. And not just hampers, stuff to help with activities of daily life and hygiene and sanitary products. So the accusations that I heard this morning really are not fair and not founded and not true. And I just want to encourage all of us to, as much as possible, really try to unite, because we are fighting a common enemy. We shouldn't be fighting and attacking each other like how it's easy to do sometimes. This is really not the time for that. So I just wanted to stand briefly to make that very quick submission. And I'm obliged, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Kevin Boyce, your turn, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank us all for being here. Here we stand. There was a statement made in the past few weeks about the voice of the people being the voice of God. I might attempt to use the Latin, Mr. President, and probably Senator Rogers. I believe the pronunciation is Vox Populi, Vox Dei. Now, if the voice of the people is the voice of God, we should wield that voice softly, right? Because it's a powerful voice. This period that we stand and we've heard all the terms used to define it. But following on from Senator Haynes, we have to move beyond the optics, Mr. President. You know, this time is not the time to be talking about who is B or who is D or who is P, because we're dealing with a situation in which the disease doesn't discriminate. I'm going to hold up my nose, Mr. President, the glasses and the... And because it does not discriminate, people are scared. People are scared, and now is not the time to be playing politics on either side. On either side. We need to recognize that we need to move beyond trying to look a certain way or score points. You have one side that's hell-bent on saying that everything is some type of action to gain unwarranted power. You have another side saying, well, this is the best that could be done and the best ever. And then you just have some who making noise. But the people are scared while all this discourse is occurring. So what do we do about it? Let us stop playing politics with this disease, Mr. President. Sir, the government finds itself in a situation in which the World Bank has described the region's situation is moving from lackluster to calamitous. That is what has been stated, sir. We can't qualify for debt relief beyond a debt standstill if we're fortunate, sir. And Senator Adams has indicated that there are some reserves. How do we deal with this situation that we find ourselves in? All hands need to be on deck to push forward, Mr. President. Unemployment will increase, has increased 14,000 claims, upward adjustment to 20,000 claims, Mr. President. Businesses are understandably hesitant about what we do in this circumstance. So we have an opportunity now as the persons who have been saddled with the responsibility, some of us saddled, others went looking for it, sir, with the responsibility of seeking how we could direct our nation forward in this time, sir. And I would encourage us here and the government to take the lead in digitizing the operations. Why are we here having this hearing, sir? Why has there not been a vote with regard to the standing orders and the adjustment to facilitate Zoom hearings or some other utilization of the technology, Mr. President? A man of your young years, sir, we should seek you that you are protected as much as possible, Mr. President. This is the opportunity for us to move beyond lip service and put into action what we say. Sir, the fact is that when we think about the spectrum of persons being impacted, individuals to businesses, there are different concerns. The purpose of a corporation is to generate profit. That's the reason that a corporation exists, Mr. President. Individuals have other concerns. We find ourselves where the banks, who were in for some harsh treatment for a lot of persons in this chamber, have set out some form of relief. The question is now, how do we build on this momentum for the benefit of all? What incentives can be offered for us to pivot into this situation? I believe Senator Adams has hinted that this is what the government is considering. What incentives can be offered for businesses to continue to retain their employees? And when I say incentives, sir, I'm speaking under the heading of the income tax legislation that we're discussing. What income tax benefits can be provided to allow businesses in these times to focus on retaining their employees, sir? What incentives can be offered to encourage the investment? This is the dialogue, and I understand that this bill was drafted before, that we should be having at this stage, sir. Mr. President, is it possible for there to be consideration of a reset of debts? Not entirely, but up to a certain level, a renegotiation of personal debts backed by the central bank? I don't know, sir. But this is the type of dialogue I would encourage instead of the optics, Mr. President. We have to find our way to push through this situation, sir. And thank goodness, as Senator Adams said, that we have the reserves to do it. But at the end of the day, the government still needs to get the revenue. So how is this balance to be done? If there is no revenue being generated, how are the incentives going to be offered? How long will that buffer that currently exists last, Mr. President? This is the active dialogue that we should be having. This is the dialogue that we should be putting forward to find solutions, sir, for the people of Barbados. Mr. President, all I can do at this stage is make suggestions. Can we increase spending? How can we do it in this circumstance? What about land tax? What about the sewage tax? What about the VAT, sir, Mr. President? At the same time, how do we get the resources to continue the safety net that Barbados is so known for? Imagine in Jamaica, it was a party promise in the last election to produce a national insurance scheme, something that Barbados has had for decades. But that requires the funding. How do we continue to maintain, sir? Sir, the question is, sir, in these times when we find ourselves having to face with this enemy, this common enemy, let's not worry about who looks better, sir. The people will judge you eventually. But for now, let's get through it, Mr. President. If you have a hat in the race, you have enough time. For now, let's get together, put all our hands together and move forward, Mr. President. Now, sir, on a personal note, we continue to thank the frontline workers and those who make the sacrifice every day to go forward. In considering whether to come here today, sir, it was pretty much a non-issue because there are persons every day who put their lives at risk to provide for us as Barbadians. So who are we to do it for a few hours, Mr. President? Also, sir, besides the frontline workers, as a father, I want to say thank you to all the teachers who are making efforts during this time to provide homework and online learning facilities. I wouldn't speak to my household, sir, but it's interesting times trying to manage family, work, and teaching. And I really want to say that we need to say a special thank you to the teachers who are helping out during this period, Mr. President. Sir, I will urge employers to consider how they can carry employees during this period. And when I say carry employees, Mr. President, as an employer as well, we are aware that there are different factors and considerations that go into what you can do during this period. Some can decide to run lean early and cut the fat. I know my firm, Mr. President, we understand our obligation and we are taking the necessary steps for as long as possible to carry our employees with us, sir. And that is something, sir, which comes at a cost. But as the Prime Minister has indicated, we all have to try to help each other. And the question is, because no one does something for nothing, can there be some incentive provided by the government for employers who are taking those steps when there are other available options which will be more mercenary, Mr. President? Understanding human nature, while we can appeal for persons to do the right thing, they are sometimes more willing to do it when there is something they can benefit in doing that task, Mr. President. Sir, I also want to say this. Those who have the luxury to be still employed and working from home, I have a personal message for you. And this might get me in trouble, but I want you to listen to me. You are not working from home. It is not business as usual. You are staying safe during a pandemic and utilizing your best efforts to assist your organization in moving forward. This concept that you simply tell an employee, go home, hold a laptop, and perform at optimum capacity when we're in the middle of a pandemic. Mr. President, I'm sure you know how the courts will deal with that if it becomes a situation that has to be looked at, sir. Let us be realistic. Let us be our brother's keeper. Let us be mindful in what we're doing during this time, sir. Sir, the times that we're in will be reviewed. Our conduct will be reviewed. As it is Ramadan, Mr. President, inshallah, when it is reviewed, let us come out on the right side of history, Mr. President. Let us say that this was a time when Barbadians came together under the mantle of moving this country forward, stepping aside and putting away. Maybe this is the ideology when you're extremely independent, you could get up and talk this, Mr. President. But stepping away from the individual and the partisan lines to put our hands together as we move inch by inch through this storm, Mr. President. I thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Boyce, and I next recognize Senator Tony Moore.
Thank you, Mr. President. Perhaps if I were in a church, after hearing Senator Boyce, I would say, let the church say amen. God has spoken, so let the church say amen. I would wish to endorse many of the contributions made on this bill, the proposal to amend the Income Tax Act. As a workers' representative, Mr. President, it is natural to expect that the amendments that have been tabled are amendments that I would readily accept, and I do. But Mr. President, my contribution this morning is surrounding a wider topic, or the wider topic within which this proposal or these amendments come. It's about social policy. It's not only about social policy, it's about fiscal policy. And it is about how we are going to be able to relate these two things. When in many countries we see that fiscal policy and social policy maybe sometimes are traveling the same road, but not necessarily in the same vehicle. So what happens very often is that the policy mixes don't often reflect the objectives, because if you set social policy objectives and you set fiscal policy objectives with no regard for social policy objectives, even if you have the same end in sight, the timing, the lag between when one reaches vis-a-vis the other creates a challenge. That's exactly what we are seeing in Barbados today, Mr. President, but not only in Barbados, the world over. As the pandemic has forced countries and has forced policymakers to grapple in quick time with some very stark realities. One of those which I wish to highlight within the context of the amendments before us relate to social protection. And it relates to how an income tax policy impacts social protection. Yes, COVID-19 has brought us in direct contact with the fact that our health, all of us, our health has been challenged in the most direct ways, and we have no control over it. Yes, COVID-19 has meant for us that we have to respond to health challenges, but in responding to those health challenges, or while we are responding to those health challenges, we also have to be responding to social challenges. Social challenges imposed by workers who are now dislocated, by businesses that suddenly can't function anymore. Not only those businesses that have been on the edge, borrowing from month to month to pay workers a salary or a wage, but even those that felt that they were pretty comfortable are finding all of a sudden that they're struggling. And these are not only businesses, Mr. President, that are in tourism and related areas. They're businesses in manufacturing that can't get raw materials. There are service industries outside the tourism industry. There are trade unions, Mr. President, that find themselves struggling. Everybody, on account of a pandemic, COVID-19, is in crisis. Outside of COVID-19, in the economic sphere, what we are hearing a lot is about the need to create fiscal space. We've heard it under the recent BERT program, the Barbados Economic and Recovery and Transformation Program. But fiscal space and creating fiscal space is perhaps more so important now on account of COVID-19. What do taxes do? Now, I'm not an economist. Never got much above a C- or so when I was in university, whether it was micro or macro. But I understand that taxes are an important source of government revenue. Amongst other things, what taxes aim to do or seek to do is correct the very thing that confronts us right now, market failure. The market is failing not because of anything it has done on its own. It's a health pandemic that has economic consequences, and so there's a failure right now. Fiscal space and the need for fiscal space, especially for a country that's under an IMF program, is very important. But how do we create it? How do we create it when we are already faced with the situation if we have missed all the cues that instructed us that we needed to do certain things to have in place exactly what we are speaking now? Senator Boyce, through you, Mr. President, this is not an attempt to score a point. But what I'm about to say is something that has been said far too often by those people like me who represent workers. And I choose the opportunity and the space provided in this chamber to make mention of it. We have not used our tax administration systems well enough. We have not done enough to ensure that we can address failures such as what we are confronted with. Specifically, I refer to the fact that the measure before us will not protect all working people. It will not protect all working people because all working people do not pay taxes. And if you don't pay taxes, this benefit does not apply to you. So it applies to just over 50% of the workforce that may be paying taxes. And as for the others who are not paying taxes, is it necessarily their fault? For some, yes. For some who have been evading taxes, yes. But for others, no. And I speak specifically for those who are in the formal sector. And by the formal sector, I mean those jobs that should attract taxes, NIS payments, those people that maybe we relate to. We go into a company and we think it's established enough, has been around for years, has been serving the country, but the workers within those walls are not accounted for formally in the system. Mr. President, I've had to challenge the government, this government, even under the recent work program, as we have engaged in discussions, not to allow us to be in a position where we are trying to seek or derive short-term gains by taking people off of a payroll, bringing them back under contracts for service. Because when you take people out of contracts of service and place them on contracts for service, more than likely, if you're not managing it well, you are removing people from feeding into the tax system. You are giving it one way, but you're losing it another way, or saving it one way and losing it another way, because these people are not likely to be paying into the tax system. They are not likely to be paying NIS into Social Security. And under our system, even if they are paying into NIS, now in this crisis, it will not benefit them. Because under our system, self-employed people or people on contracts for service do not benefit from unemployment insurance. So when we are looking at the measure before us, we are not only trying to speak to a fiscal policy determination that must be made, we are looking at the interrelatedness of that policy that I applaud for workers who will benefit for it. We are looking at the interrelatedness of that policy on the whole. Mr. President, what is the reality now for the government of Barbados? The reality is that whether people paid taxes or did not pay taxes, whether people paid NIS or did not pay NIS, the government of Barbados is still responsible